Israel rescued 2 hostages from Rafah in southern Gaza overnight during a special operation which saw troops storm the apartment building where the 2 men were reportedly being held. 60-year-old Fernando Simon Marmon and Louis Ha, who's 70, were said to be frail, not surprisingly, after being freed, but in overall good condition.
Now, the rescue operation was backed up by airstrikes that hit the crowded city overnight. The Hamas-led health ministry says at least 67 people died in the bombardment. And the British Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, has called on Israel to stop and think seriously before taking further action in Rafah.
Well, joining us now from Jerusalem is the journalist Noga Tarnopolsky. Noga, so good to talk to you. Tell us what news there is. What's the most up-to-date news you can give us?
Well, the most up-to-date news remains, what you just said, in that for Israelis, it feels almost miraculous to see these 2 men emerge, not unscathed, but in general good health. They've lost more than half of their body weight. They're still in hospital, but they're alive. And this comes after all too many weeks of either no news regarding the hostages or scary news in which Israeli officials have either spoken openly with foreign media, like the Prime Minister did yesterday on Fox News, or others in other media, and basically inferred that at least half the hostages are dead, an unknown number. So it's been a very stressful time regarding the hostages for Israelis and for the hostage families. And today, there was a spot of relief, I would say.
And Noga, you mentioned there appalling statistics that there was the Prime Minister had seemed to suggest that half the hostages were possibly dead by now. And we've seen over the past few weeks the families of the hostages getting increasingly political, lobbying the politicians, going into the parliament and so on. And what is the mood currently, not just the families of the hostages, but other Israelis, about the action or lack of action that has been taken before these 2 releases happened about the hostages?
Right. That too, it's a pretty confusing situation. The last serious poll on this subject came out Friday from the Israel Democracy Institute, and it showed that a slim majority of Israelis believe that the most important goal of this war should be the release of the hostages. And what that implies is that Israelis are more interested in the diplomatic efforts, which may be renewed tomorrow, to release the hostages, anything that can possibly release the hostages, rather than what the Prime Minister is promising, which is sort of all-out war. The phrase that he has gone back to again and again is, I quote, total victory, without defining that. And so, at the same time that today felt, I think, almost miraculous to some Israelis, seeing these 2 men emerge safe from 4 months as captives, there was also news about 2 21-year-old soldiers killed in the operation in Gaza and many more wounded. So Israelis are paying a very high price, and I think faced with the government that hasn't been completely clear with them, are responding in an ambiguous way themselves. For example, a huge majority of Israelis say they want to see Hamas absolutely destroyed. And yet when you ask the question about the hostages, that comes off as the #1 aim that Israelis hope for.
Noga, where's this war going? I mean, you say that the Israelis have suffered. Of course, the Palestinians have suffered unimaginably as well. Palestinian civilians and children, blameless people who've been obliterated by the Israeli offensive. How does this end?
Well, if I had the answer to your question, I would be in government and not on this TV program. I don't know. And I have to say again, it's a very disturbing reality, but the Israeli government and the Israeli Prime Minister, who has become basically the voice, the only voice of the government, refuse to define a concrete end, instead choosing kind of bombastic, rah-rah slogans like total victory, total destruction, chopping off the heads, metaphorically, of the leadership of this terror organization. And yet, as bizarre as it may sound to you, when there were negotiations in Cairo for the hostage release last week, which would imply at the very least a long ceasefire, a long truce, Israel didn't even send representatives, when one would think that Israel is the #1 interested party for a hostage release deal. So we don't know how this ends, and there's growing political pressure on Netanyahu to at least articulate something. The fear of a growing number of Israelis. Remember, 80% of Israelis consistently say they would like to see him gone. So the fear of many, many people in this country is that because he fears for his own political future, the prime minister can't yet quite imagine an end for this war, because once the war ends, there will be massive public pressure for a national commission of inquiry regarding the failures that led to this war. There will have to, by necessity, be a group, someone, some entity that replaces Hamas as the ruling body in Gaza. And except for the prime minister, it appears no one else wants it to be the Israeli army. So he will have to answer tough questions. And there are pretty good chances that his coalition, that's a very, very extremist coalition, also a very inexperienced coalition, that he won't be able to keep them together. And Israelis are straddling these competing military and political concerns in a way that's very difficult.
Okay, Noga, thank you very much.